So, as we continue this important conversation about identity, I want to address and clarify some things based on some questions that have come up regarding this topic. And one question is, should Christians even be talking about identity? I mean, isn't this too self-focused? Shouldn't we be focused on God and what He's done and who He is? And, that sounds pious and it sounds good on the one hand. We should be, as Christians, totally focused on what God has done. We should be focused on who God is. We should be setting our eyes on the things above and fixing our gaze on Christ. But the scriptures do tell us about who we are. The scriptures do talk about our identity in Christ. Romans 8, Ephesians 1 through 3, 2 Corinthians 5, where it tells us that we are a new creation in Christ. Those are all passages full of identity statements. And sure, we could take this too far. We could take it to an extreme where it is an unhealthy focus on self. But I think Romans 12 helps us out. Romans 12 verse 3 says, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself at all." No, it doesn't say that. It says, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So here we are told that there is a biblical way to think about ourselves. There is a right way to think about ourselves, to do it according to the measure of faith that God has given us, not more highly than we ought to think. So I think this is a helpful passage that exposes really a hole in the argument of those that say we shouldn't think about identity or who we are in Christ at all. That's just modern pop psychology being smuggled into the church. Now, sure, there are plenty of examples of that as well, but I don't think this is one of them. I think there is a right and biblical way to think about ourselves, that it is important for us to realize who we are in Christ and how that sets us free to live according to our new identity. I mean, Paul says it in Ephesians 4 verse 1. After 3 chapters of telling us who we are in Christ, he says, "I urge you therefore, brothers, as a prisoner of the Lord, to live in a manner worthy of the calling that you have received." That word calling is referring back to all of these identity statements of who we are in Christ. This calling that we have been given from God. So, to not think more highly than we ought to and recognize that my life is hidden with Christ, that I have been united to Him, and that is what's significant. That is what gives me purpose and meaning, that I am in Jesus Christ and that I am found in Him, and that by His Spirit He is living out His life through me. So this is good news. It's important for us to clarify these things, but I think it is right for us as believers to consider our identity in Christ in a biblically informed way.